Hello, my name is Mikhail Clark, and for my Foundations of the Restoration project, I've made a video about the priesthood restriction. I wanted to do my project on the priesthood restriction because I didn't know a lot about it, and I felt like it would be a really cool way for me to learn more about it, but also be able to share what I've learned with everyone else. So I broke my video up into 3 different sections. The first section is about questions I had and wanted to answer about the priesthood restriction. The second section is about people's personal experiences who were alive when the priesthood restriction was lifted. I know these people personally, so it was really cool to be able to hear about their personal experiences as they were alive and experienced this moment. And the third part is about African American pioneers who crossed the plains and lived in the Salt Lake Valley and had to endure lots of hardships and trials, but were still faithful throughout the end. So I hope you enjoy! We do know that the priesthood restriction consists of limiting men and women of African descent to receive their endowment and sealing in the temple. Men of African descent were not allowed to hold the priesthood, and missionary work in Africa was not open. There are quite a few speculations and justifications for why the restriction of the priesthood came about. One of them was that society was just not open to equality for blacks and whites at the time, and because of that, it caused the church to rethink about what they should do regarding blacks and whites. And because of this, it caused them to put in the restriction so that they wouldn't get such a negative feedback from society. Another speculation that I found when I was doing my research is that God sometimes limits who holds his priesthood. For example, in the Old Testament, the Levites were the only ones who held the Aaronic priesthood. Also, in other parts of the Bible, the Jews were the only ones who had the gospel, and they weren't allowed to preach it into the Gentiles until after Christ was resurrected. When the priesthood restriction was lifted, people of African descent were able to enter into the temples and perform the endowments and sealings. African men were also able to receive the priesthood. And then missionaries were able to be sent out to Africa, along with Africans being able to be those missionaries. All these things resulted in the church growing and helping to spread the gospel throughout the world. I know several people who were alive when the priesthood restriction was lifted. I wanted to learn about their cool experiences, but since I was unable to directly film them, I asked them to text me instead. The next couple videos are some of my friends being their voices for me and sharing those experiences.
I have strong feelings on this subject as we were living in a ghetto compound in central Baltimore while my husband was completing a 2-year residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The units where we lived were walled off from the neighborhood, and we had a guard at the gate. I had 2 kids under 2 at the time, and we would often leave the compound and visit the nearby grocery store. Sometimes we would be the only Caucasians in the store, and people were very kind to us, although I still had to watch my wallet. I was shocked when we moved back to Salt Lake City because it was so white. I was in our apartment alone at the time with the kids when my sister in Salt Lake City called to tell me what had happened with this revelation. I have had few very important spiritual experiences in my life, and that was one of them. My whole body vibrated, and I nearly collapsed because it was so powerful and I cried for joy. This sounds like a dramatic description because I'm generally understated. To this day, despite all of the debates everyone has to dissect this revelation, I have a testimony.
I was in Japan at the time. I was a zone leader of the Tokyo East Zone. I remember I received a call from the mission office. I remember exactly where I was sitting, which was at the table in our apartment. We had 6 elders in the apartment. The mission home told me about the revelation. I had the unbelievably strong spirit come over me and confirm the truth of it. I cannot express how happy I was and how happy the other missionaries were when I told them. I admit it was one of the greatest spiritual experiences of my life. No question, the Spirit confirmed to me and everyone in the apartment that the Lord was speaking.
Jane Manning James was born in Connecticut to a free black family in 1822. She joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Connecticut when she was about 15 years old. She later wanted to join the Saints in Nauvoo. The trek from Connecticut to Nauvoo involved taking a canal boat. Jane and her family were not permitted to board the boat because of their race, but this did not stop them from getting to Nauvoo. Instead, they walked there and left blood marks in the snow from their footprints. When Jane reached Nauvoo, she stayed at Joseph Smith's mansion and later worked as a housekeeper in Joseph and Emma Smith's home. Jane learned a lot of church principles and doctrine through living in the Smith household and also had a close relationship with Emma and Lucy Mack Smith. Jane married Isaac James and made the trek to the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. She lived in Salt Lake City for 52 years and was able to do baptisms for the dead for her ancestors. She wanted to enter into the temple for her endowment but was denied. However, she continued to live faithfully and stayed strong in the church. She died in 1908 at the age of 95. The Deseret News reported, quote, "Few persons were more noted for faith and faithfulness than was Jane Manning James. And though of the humble earth, she numbered friends and acquaintances by the hundreds." Close quote. Samuel D. Chambers was born in 1844 in Alabama as a slave. He was baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Mississippi at the age of 13. Samuel was freed after the Civil War and worked as a sharecropper and shoemaker. Once he had enough money saved, he and his family made the trek to Utah. Samuel hadn't had contact with the church for 21 years but was still faithful and wanted to join the saints in Utah. Samuel and his family settled in the Salt Lake Valley in 1870 and he became a successful fruit planter. Samuel was very dedicated to the church and would attend deacon quorum meetings. He often bore his testimony and magnified all church obligations. Samuel died in 1929 at age 98. Although Samuel never held the priesthood, he remained faithful to the church throughout his life. To Samuel, the church always came first. Mary Lucille Perkins Bankhead was born in 1902. She's a descendant of Green Flake and Jane Manning James. She was the secretary of the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers and the first Relief Society president of the Genesis Group. Fun fact about her was she did the temple work for Jane Manning James when the priesthood restriction was lifted. Elijah Abel was born in Frederick, Maryland on July 25, 1810. His first encounter with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1832. Elijah met Ezekiel Roberts, a missionary, and was baptized later that year at age 22. Elijah was ordained an elder on January 25, 1836. Joseph Smith signed his ministerial certificate. Elijah was one of very few men of African descent who held the priesthood prior to 1978. Later, Elijah was also ordained a member of the Third Quorum of the 70. This quorum's responsibility was dedicated to missionary work. Elijah served 3 full-time missions in Ohio, New York, and Canada. Elijah married Mary Ann Abel and came to the Salt Lake Valley with the saints in 1847. When the priesthood restriction was put in place, Elijah was still able to hold the priesthood. In 1883, at 73 years of age, Elijah went on another mission to Ohio. The mission must have been straining on him. He returned to Utah in December of 1884 and died later that month on Christmas Day. Elijah Abel was a very faithful, strong, and dedicated member of the church, despite seeing his priesthood authority be limited. When he died, the Deseret News and Herald stated that he died in full faith of the gospel. Green Flake was the slave of James N. Flake. Green was converted to the church along with other Flake family members and was baptized on April 7, 1844. He traveled with the Flake household to Nauvoo and winter quarters. Green was part of the first company of saints that headed west to the Great Basin. Green was one of the men sent ahead to prepare the Salt Lake Valley for the saints in 1847. Several years later, Green was freed and lived in both Utah and Idaho. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do this project because it has taught me so much and helped my perspective to grow in so many different ways. When I came into the class and started this project, I had a lot of questions about the priesthood restriction. I wanted to know why it came about, how it came about, and what the purpose of it was. I've learned a lot, but I haven't found solid, complete evidence and answers to any of those questions. However, things I have learned is that God loves all His children, He has perfect timing, and revelation continues in the modern day. Through understanding these 3 critical things, it has helped me enlarge my perspective on the priesthood restriction. I hope this video has also helped you enlarge in this perspective, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much!